Let's talk a little bit about purity tests. So there are two different kinds of purity tests. One of them I am completely against. In fact, I will argue against one of these kinds of purity tests. The other kind of purity test I have, and I have standards, and you should too. So, what do I mean? Well, the first kind of purity test is what I would call purity of personal story, or purity on ancillary issues. So what I mean by that is, listen, we all have pasts. Nobody was born perfect. Nobody was born with the politics of Noam Chomsky. Nobody, just kind of had the correct and acceptable and moral and ethical positions on everything from when they were young. And this is part of human growth and human development, is you live, you learn, you grow. It's that simple. So, if you've ever made distasteful jokes, or you've said terrible things in the past, or you've believed terrible things in the past, you've had questionable positions, honestly, I don't hold that against you or anybody at all. I don't care if you were, a hardcore Trump supporter or George W. Bush supporter or a hardcore Republican or whatever last year. I don't care if you dabbled in insane and dangerous beliefs in the past, whether it be alt-right stuff or whatever, fill in the blank. If we can sufficiently convince you that that's incorrect and you have a change of heart and you have, undergo some sort of an enlightenment or evolution, why wouldn't you want to welcome those people with open arms? I mean, that's how you win. You win by convincing people and converting people. And what we have today is a movement on the left that in many ways embodies the exact opposite of that. That, if you are happy to get support from or build bridges with people who either in the past have said questionable things or done questionable things, or people who you agree with a lot on some things but not on other things, you got some people who are like, no, burn it all down, burn every bridge that's not with people who agree with you 100% up front and haven't always agreed with you. And honestly, that is a recipe for disaster, and that's a recipe for losing. So that's one kind of purity test. And that's the kind of purity test that I'm so sick of, and I want to obliterate and eliminate. And I want nobody on the left to be that kind of a, stick up your ass kind of person. And unfortunately, again, it's super common. We see it all the time. People will get crap just for associating with somebody who may have some questionable beliefs. You know what I mean? It's like when Glenn Greenwald or some other left-winger goes on Tucker Carlson's show, and then all of a sudden, it's like Glenn Greenwald needs to be, he's now out of the cool kids club. We don't consider him on the left anymore, and we think he's a closet right-winger or something, and he overlooks racism and bigotry because Tucker's bigoted, so therefore Glenn is bigoted, and it's just like, there are some people on the left who don't even realize it, but they're very comfortable and happy being an outsider subculture that will never take the reins of power. Because to them, it's more about their feelings and, being an edgy outsider and actually trying to get political power and make positive change for the people. So we can't be comfortable being an insufferable subgroup. We have to be serious about power and taking the reins of control and improving the country and implementing our policies. And you cannot do that by having that approach, by having the weird personal story purity tests and, the guilt by association nonsense. Never do guilt by association. It's always been dumb. They used to do it. Republican commentators and Fox News used to do that all the time. This was back early on before we knew Obama was a neoliberal, but they used to go after Obama because you knew the person and sat there. Who cares? I mean, the amount of energy that goes into making these gotcha arguments when there's nothing substantive there is just soul crushing. So don't be like that. There were stories that a bunch of people were pissed at Bernie because Bernie accepted the endorsement of Joe Rogan. It's the most popular podcast host in America. God damn it, take yes for an answer. Take yes for an answer. What the hell? Yeah, but he said things that are bad and believes some things that are bad, and makes jokes that are bad. Oh, come on. What are you, 6? Grow up, man. It's so stupid. So on that kind of purity test, the purity of personal story, gone. Doesn't exist. Get rid of it. Hate it. You should never buy into that nonsense. Never buy into the, ultra social justice warrior-y stuff that goes way too far. But then there's another kind of purity test. And this kind of purity test is purity of core principles or purity of core policies. On this one, I have a purity test, and I think you should too, and you need to demand it of your politicians. So here's what I mean by that. There are some things I'm not going to bend on. Some policies I'm not going to bend on, but they're all substantive. It's all substantive. So you guys know, for me, I'm a deep believer in Medicare for all and free college and a living wage and ending the wars. And certainly in this modern era where we see what's happening with this pandemic, I'm now totally on board with UBI. I think we need Social Security for all, 100%. Now, am I saying that these are the things I believe in, and any politician I support needs to believe in every one of these things that I'm pushing for? No, because, you have to be somewhat realistic and interface and interact with the world as it exists, not as you want it to be. So I can't say, here are my demands and all of these things you must believe in. No. But can I make the case that you have to not only believe in, but also convince me that you'll fight for and push for at least one or two of my core policies that coincide with my principles? Yes. On that, I'm sorry. I'm done in this sense. You will never see me bend my values and bend my beliefs to go along to get along and play for the team and, fall in line because, hey, lesser evil. Nope. I'm done with that, and you should be too. Because where does that game get us? Nowhere. It gets us with the political spectrum going further and further to the right, and the so-called lefties being dragged further and further to the right. And you compromise away all your values until you're at the point where it's like, hey, do you support the fascist or the ultra-fascist? I don't support either one. I'm against fascism. Ridiculous. Purity test. It's like, wait, did you guys not see how ridiculous this is? You could set up 1,000 scenarios where people will understand how ridiculous it is. Hey, would you rather have David Duke or Richard Spencer be president? Neither. Well, here's why David Duke is slightly less terrible compared to Richard Spencer, so got to pick that one. No, I don't. I don't at all. And you could piss off if you're insisting I do have to pick one. I'm not going to. So I'm done with that. But what my position is on the purity test of core policies. You have to not only nominally and on paper agree with me on at least one or two of those things, but I have to be convinced that you actually will fight for one or two of those things. So not just you're placating me and yeah, I'm for that. Like, that's not enough. I need to know that, or just be convinced that for one or two of my deeply held policy beliefs, you'll fight for it. And if that is the case, then you will see me say, I'll support this person, I'll vote for this person, I'll argue for this person. But I'm not going to do it if I'm not convinced that at least on one or two of my main issues that they're going to fight for it. And it doesn't matter how much you try to shame me, how much you try to insult me, how much you try to, because people are vicious when you take this approach. It's crazy. When you have standards that you want to apply, people are vicious. They're vicious. They're like, how dare you not support, Biden for one instance. And it's like, well, because it's not on me. It's on him. I'm telling you exactly what would need to be done for me to support him, and he's not going to do it. And even for Biden, I made another exception, which I probably shouldn't do, but I did, which is listen, if he were to pick Nina Turner or Bernie Sanders as VP, I'll vote for him. And that's even with me saying I still don't think he would push for any of those policies that I love. But I'm making an exception because if Bernie or Nina's in the room, I know that they will push him to be as good as he could possibly be and might have some impact and might push him left to some extent. So I'm taking a risk there, but it's a risk worth taking, in my opinion. Because I know Biden's not going to push for any of the policies I believe in. So what's the next best thing? Well, have your VP be somebody who I know believes in all of those policies. But, like, point is, it's not on me, man. It's on them. Because my test is as reasonable as I could make it. You know, I could be an asshole, and I could say, no, my policies are Medicare for all, free college, living wage, end the wars, Green New Deal, legalize marijuana, UBI, and you have to be for all of those things and convince me that you will win and fight for all of those things. If I wanted to be a prick, if I wanted to be unreasonable, I could say that. But I'm not unreasonable. Because I understand that, you know, we have to function in the system that exists. So I've gone all the way to the position of, oh, no, I have a purity test. But I'm lenient. And perhaps I'm more lenient than even some people in this audience. But I will support somebody, vote for somebody, argue for somebody if I'm convinced they will not only say they believe in it, but fight for at least one or two of the policies that I deeply believe in. I think that I have a very reasonable, if anything, slightly lax purity test, but I do have a purity test because you know what that means? I have standards. And somehow we've gotten to the position where it's frowned upon when you say you have standards that you want to hold your politicians to. All the anger directed at me should be directed to the politicians to listen to my very reasonable purity test and to act on it. Because that will convince a hell of a lot more people. I guarantee you, if Biden were to suddenly take one or two of the things I care about and actually keep talking about it and say, I'm going to fight for this, he would definitely convince way more people that wouldn't vote for him to vote for him. So all the anger, don't direct it at me. Because it's not on me. They're supposed to represent me. If the politician doesn't represent me, that's on them. That's their fault. That's their problem. So, again, there are two kinds of purity tests. One of them I don't believe in at all, and I have no test when it comes to purity of personal story, purity of your past, purity on those ancillary issues. I'm as lenient as it gets on that. The other kind of purity test, purity of core policies, purity of principles. Oh, I have a test there. And maybe my test is a little too strict for many of you who watch the show, or maybe my test is a little too lenient for some of you who watch the show. But I'm telling you what my test is. I'm telling you up front what it is. Hey, here are the issues I care deeply about. If you convince me you will fight for one or two of those issues, and you really convince me, then I'll argue for you. Then I'll fight for you. Then I'll vote for you. But if you're not going to do it, www.pissoff.org. Because I'm done playing this game, man. We've played it for far too long. And I highly, highly, highly recommend. I mean, I would argue not only should you guys have a purity test, but it should mirror the basic layout that I'm talking about here. Not necessarily that you have to, on every particular issue, I'm going to agree with Kyle. No, maybe you value certain issues more than other issues. Maybe paid time off is in your top 5, for example. But my point is, if you should have your own set of policies that you care deeply about, and you should also, I think, have, if a politician convinces me they will fight for one or two of them and they mean it, then I'll probably support that politician. That's what I think is fair and reasonable and understandable. And I know some people will say I'm being too lenient, and some people will say I'm being too strict. But I'm giving you my ideas on this up front, and I wanted to lay it out for you in detail. What I mean by there's two kinds of purity tests. One I hate, the other I actually like. And now you have that distinction, and whenever we have these conversations about purity tests, I hope you guys all make that distinction. Because sometimes it's all lumped in together, and I don't think that makes sense. I don't think that's fair, because those are two very different things, and two very different dynamics, and I think it makes sense to make the distinction. But anyway, there you have it. And I'm sure, even given these standards, I'm sure there will be so many politicians who will still let me down big time.